Hello, good morning to everyone, and thank you very much for joining our webinar, our fourth webinar, our fifth webinar in uh, our games sustainability and sport series. And today we're going to be learning about how to promote sustainability in sport events. One second, I'm having a bit of trouble with my sharing my screen, so if you just give me 1 second just to come out of that. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Maybe it'd be better if I just did it like this. So today we've got a number of guests here today. We're going to be talking about Glasgow 2024, the World Athletics Indoor Championships, and we're going to tell a story about how they made sustainability a key part of the story of the championships. First of all, we're going to have Bob Ramczak, who's the head of sustainability at World Athletics, who's going to be talking to us generally about the importance of sustainability for the International Federation. And then we'll go to Susie Thompson and Joe Lay, who are going to talk about the development of the Athletics for a Better World Standard that was implemented during Glasgow 2024. And then finally, towards the end of the presentation, we'll go to John Blair and Stuart Campbell, who are the Social Impact Manager and Championship Director of the World Athletics Indoor Championships Glasgow 2024, respectively. We'll talk a little bit about their impact strategy and how the Athletics for a Better World Standard helped support their strategy for the event. During this presentation, first of all, we'll learn about the Athletics for a Better World Standard and what it is. And then we'll find out a little bit about how the standard was developed and applied to Glasgow 2024. We'll also focus on how social and environmental impact was important for Glasgow 2024, and then how generally sustainability can be authentically promoted at a major sporting event. Now, of course, this is the fifth out of 6 webinars in our games project series of webinars. The Games Project is an EU-funded project through the Erasmus Plus programme, and World Athletics, of course, is one of our sports partners alongside the International Biathlon Union, the International Football Federation, and the Swedish Football Federation. And our technical partner for the project is the Santana School of Advanced Studies, and I represent Touchline, the dissemination partner for the project. And the project has 5 key objectives. The first one is raising awareness and increasing adoption of climate change mitigation practices among key sports actors, particularly in the sports of athletics, biathlon and floorball. And throughout the project, we've been analysing current climate change governance and management models adopted in those sports to help each develop a path towards decarbonisation. The project has also supported the sports with strategic objectives, programmes and operational frameworks, and developing training modules to improve environmental knowledge and awareness among sports organisations and employees. And mainly, one of the key aspects of this project is to leverage the popularity of these sports to increase environmental awareness generally in sport. So that's enough for me talking about the Games project. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker of the webinar, which is Bob Ramczak, who's the head of sustainability. Who will talk to us a little bit about the Athletics for a Better World Standard and give us a bit of a starting point for our webinar. Bob, over to you.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see a nice crowd out there this morning. Let me just share my screen. I got a few slides here. Okay, so just a little bit of context and background here. I'll give you the roughly 120-second version of that today. When World Athletics set out to develop its sustainability strategy back in 2018, we knew that a critical element of the strategy would be to bring all events under our remit along with us in order to create the widest possible front across the sport to tackle the triple planetary threat of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. So how would we do that? By making all of those events re-examine how they're staged and begin a push toward a delivery model that where sustainability becomes a key guiding principle. Among the tools we developed is the Athletics for a Better World Standard. It's a certification that evaluates, measures, and scores an event's achievement in sustainable delivery, and most importantly, in delivering that event in alignment with the 6 pillars that frame our sustainability strategy. So it looks at all aspects of event delivery: energy, waste, for example, accommodation, travel, accessibility, well-being. It looks at the types of collaborations or partnerships that are created, and it looks at how initiatives are communicated. The standard consists of 55 action areas with 120 total available points. It's a tiered system with platinum, gold, silver, bronze, recognized event levels that will have to be met eventually as part of a broader evaluation process of all of our World Athletics licensed, permitted, or owned events from the beginning of this year. So that means that from the beginning of 2024, sustainability reporting via the ABW standard is a requirement for all World Athletics owned or licensed events. And looking ahead, minimum achievement requirements will be a contractual obligation for all of our World Championship events from 2027. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Bob. That's really, really helpful. That really sets
Okay.
the scene nicely. We're going to try and make this webinar a little bit more interactive than our previous webinars. So I'm going to ask Bob a couple of questions about the standard before we move to Susie, who's going to tell us a little bit about the development of the standards. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Let us know which organisation you represent, and give us as many questions as you can, and we'll try and get through as many of them at the end. But Bob, very quickly, coming to you, you talked a little bit about how the standard fits into the sustainability strategy of World Athletics. Can you give us a little bit more context about why the standard is important to you as an organisation and how it kind of fits into that kind of overarching sustainability strategy?
Sure. Well, very specifically, the strategy is built on those 6 pillars that we referred to earlier. So the standard evaluates very specifically how an event delivers against those pillars. A key objective of our strategy is that 100% of our licensed and owned events commit to the ABW standard by 2030. So that's really, really key. Another is that all of our 214 member federations are aware of sustainability implications and begin to take action by 2030. So the ABW standard really is the strongest tool we have to make sure that happens.
And before we move to Susie, tell us a little bit about why Glasgow 24 was an important event to see the evolution of the standard. Why was it an important one for you to kind of feature the standard?
Well, it really was a great start. After 2 years of piloting the system with well over 200 events, piloted, one or several aspects of the standard over the past 2 years. It was implemented from January of this year. Like I said, that meant that sustainability reporting is now mandatory for all of our events. We didn't set any minimum requirements for this year, and Glasgow was under no obligation to deliver to a certain level. So to work with an LOC that was really so committed from the outset to delivering really well was really a great way to kick off the implementation of our standard. Stuart and his team, they set a really high bar, and they provided some great examples, which I hope we'll have a chance to discuss a bit more in detail this morning.
Yeah, we are. We're going to talk a lot about some of those examples, those tangible examples, in a bit. But next, we're going to move to Susie and Joe. So Susie and Joe were obviously instrumental in putting together the Athletics for a Better World Standard and supporting World Athletics with their sustainability strategy. Susie, can you give us a little bit of background? How was the standard developed, and what was your role in it?
Yeah, well, we helped World Athletics and supported them to put the strategy together in the first place, and then. Let me just share. I'll share a couple of slides.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Let me see. Hopefully you got that. See those?
Yeah, all good, Susie. Go ahead.
Perfect. So as Bob said, we had the strategy. We put that together. We'd identified the 6 pillars. That was what was core and key to what World Athletics wanted to achieve. We looked at existing standards out there because there are a number of different, whether that's, ISO frameworks or Council for Responsible Sport. So there's a number of different frameworks, and we evaluated how these could or would help World Athletics, because fundamentally what we wanted to do was embed, deliver, support, deliver the strategy through the major events. And not just the major events, then have that as a framework that would then be able to be used for all athletics events. When we looked at those, there were areas which were not all encompassed in there. Maybe some areas which were key priorities to World Athletics were missing. So we then developed our own standard, and we then said, let's take the best bits and let's learn from all of these existing ones out there. So for sure, we've, taken some and learned from what exists and what's out there. World Athletics has actually used the ISO 2012-1, so that is a standard, but that's a framework of how they deliver events from their own side, and they can get as far as like, oh, we've got an LOC now who are really delivering it on our behalf. So putting the standard together was really starting off as kind of guidance, so you could use it as a guide, but actually also as a target for driving best practice, and fundamentally for their own events, their own World Championship Series events, that was going to be set a certain standard of achievement, and Bob went through those levels. So we've taken each pillar, and if I just move here, so we took each pillar: the leadership, sustainable production and consumption, climate change, carbon, local environment and air quality, global equality, and the diversity, access and wellbeing. Those are the 6 pillars of the strategy. Took each of those. Then we said what's core, what is absolutely critical under each of those pillars that we think each event that would be recognised as a Athletics for a Better World event, what should they be delivering? And we identified some really core criteria in there, and those have become mandatory points. So there are some mandatory points, and then there are some options. And the challenge for us has always been to present something or develop something that has global applicability, which is tough because in some cases you may be in a very, in a large city, in other places you may be in more remote areas. So, and you've got different setups and structures of organising committees, different scales of structure as well. So we've tried to create something that has global global applicability in there. I keep going. Core focus. I think a core focus for us, if I just touch on that, is planning and getting the planning pieces right. So a lot of our criteria are around planning. And our feeling is if you get that right, you set targets, you identify actions, you assign responsibility, you then have developed the accountability. People know what to do, they know what's expected for them, and then, ever the optimist, you get results as driven out of that. So that's really what we have tried to develop, create something. Of course, it's going to have its challenges because you're trying to, deliver that across the globe. But that's how that's the background and the ethos, if you like, of the whole standard.
Thanks, Susie. That's really helpful. So a couple of follow-up questions. I'll come to Joe in a minute to talk about the kind of operational side of things and how you kind of operationalize a standard like this. But kind of sticking on those kind of six pillars, Susie, you talked about the fact that you had to make decisions between what was mandatory and what was additional, but trying to keep things global. Tell us a little bit about that kind of thought process behind that and how you kind of came to those decisions kind of practically.
I think our feeling was if you got the plans right, so if you look at some of these, we've got from the leadership side, it was identifying, who are your key stakeholders, what therefore is their expectation of you, what therefore should you be talking to them about, what would they want to see delivered as a result of this. That then sets you up, but that also gives you the flexibility to put your own flavour on each event. We weren't really prescriptive about exactly what that had to be. It is quite prescriptive in a way, the standard, but it gives some, and hopefully Stuart and John can highlight that, like there was definitely colour and flavour from Glasgow and what was important to them. When you get into, the communications and reporting, there's some core things that, we want to come out of this. We want you to be able to communicate it. We want you to be able to report transparently. We want to be able to take those forward and then for other events to learn from that. So, part of the kind of support and the templates that we've developed post Glasgow that are available there are some of that kind of legacy piece, that learning piece, that sharing piece that would sit in all of those mandatory bits. If we look at something like air quality, and this is more of a challenge, but air quality is a core focus for World Athletics. It's the health and sciences team. It's been an area where they've campaigned on for years, and a whole bunch of data in there looking at air quality and the impacts on athletes. Our feeling was how could we then take that and drive that further forward into actually through events and then connecting to the cities or the areas where these events are being run. Now, for the World Championship events, for sure, World Athletics go in and they set up their own air quality monitoring. That's harder as you maybe get down to the smaller events, but actually it starts a conversation with the city, and it starts a conversation with this is really important. not just on the health and well-being of the athletes, but fundamentally on the health and well-being of anybody who is, you know, whether they're walking or running or whatever they're doing around a city. So you start driving beyond the event, you start driving kind of impact, if you like, health, well-being impact out of these events. So these were core pieces in there that we wanted everybody in each event to really focus on and address. And then the additional criteria, it's much more flexible, and there's much more sort of ability for that event to take on its own priorities and its own priorities basically, and actions.
Joe, coming to you now, bringing it into the conversation a little bit. We talk about from a kind of government's perspective, kind of embedding these kind of 6 kind of pillars and criteria into events going forward. But tell us about how you kind of turn it into action. How do you operationalize these things? Maybe you can talk about that with Glasgow as the context.
Yeah, sure. I think from a Glasgow perspective, I think in terms of operationalizing it, it was, you know, Stuart will come on to it later, but he set sustainability, social impact, and sort of achieving against the Athletics for a Better World Standard in the priority list right from the start. So it really, from an operationalizing it perspective, it really goes from the very beginning of, you know, the LOC forming and it being part of those really initial discussions all the way through to, you know, the post-event reporting and sort of wrapping up the event. So in terms of operationalizing it, it's the full life cycle, I would say. And then there's obviously different focus areas at each point in that life cycle. So Susie touched on it a minute ago, but it, you know, having that standard there with the thresholds, and it gives you some, like, it helps in that target setting process. So if you're not sure where to start from a target setting process, what your priorities are, you know, what matters to people, then it's a really good place to sort of say, you know, we want to, you know, from a Glasgow perspective, we want to try and achieve platinum, or actually we think gold is where we want to achieve, and then perhaps in future years we want to climb up that ladder. So in terms of that target setting point of view, it really kind of helps put the North Star in place and achieve those levels. And I guess then once you've set that target, you're then thinking, okay, well, how are we going to get there? What is it that we need to do to actually make that happen? And in the first instance, and I know Stuart did this as well with his colleagues, as a gap analysis. Okay, that's the standard. Where are we at now? What are we already planning to do? What are we already prioritizing? What are we going to do anyway? And then actually, where are the gaps within the standard? Where are the other things, or the things we maybe haven't thought about yet, or we need to consider in order to kind of put together that holistic roadmap. So, you know, Glasgow already had the makings of their social impact strategy. They already had their, you know, focus areas across sustainability, EDI, you know, access to physical activity. So they already had that framework in place. And then it was about making sure that framework aligned to the standard and also was holistic. So it covered not just the local priorities, but actually the operational priorities as well, and the plans that Susie mentioned. How are we making sure that the functional areas know that sustainability needs to be integrated into their operational plans? How are we integrating that in a seamless way, so it's not just a standalone kind of document over here, it's actually as part of their operating procedures and their, you know, their regular operating plans. And the standard was a really good way to engage those teams, those functional area teams, on that. So how we did that was things like setting up a little, you know, workshops with each of the functional areas, and again going through that gap analysis with them. What you're already doing, what is part of your plans already. Okay, this is what the standard is saying. This is what we need to then try and work out how we create solutions, because we haven't quite meeting this criteria yet. So it really was a useful prompt to engage in some of those conversations, both within the LOC and the functional areas. But I would also extend that to partners as well. So whether that's commercial partners or funding partners, or whoever, it is really that framework to engage people and make sure that, as I say, it's not just the social impact team over there, and it's not just their issue and challenge. It's actually every team's issue and challenge, and every team can play a crucial role in doing their bit and contributing positively towards that standard. Because when it then comes to the evidence gathering piece, which when you like any standard, and making sure that that's audited and measured credibly, like having that documentation and that evidence piece across all areas of the business is also crucial. So, coordinating that with the functional areas is a challenge at times when in events world, people don't have the luxury of time, but yeah, again, it was a way for us to engage those people in a productive and constructive way, rather than saying we need to do X, Y, and Z. It was, okay, we need to do X, Y, and Z. How can we work together to do that? So really collaborative, set the target, help you, build that roadmap and engage everybody in that roadmap. And then a really collaborative piece to sort of pull it together at the end to make sure the evidence is in place and that can be audited, and, the standard that you set out at the beginning can hopefully be achieved. So yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour of operationalising it.
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Joe. And we're going to unpack lots of that during the Q&A. We're going to have quite a chunky Q&A for this particular webinar. So if you do have any questions in the audience, feel free to get them in now, and we'll get through them as much as we can. But I think most of Joe's points segue very nicely into finding out a bit more about how it was operationalised in Glasgow, and finding out about some of the social impact projects and strategy that you had for the championships. So now's a good time to hand over to Stuart and John, who can talk a little bit about Glasgow 2024's social impact strategy and how the Athletics for a Better World Standard supported their goals. So Stuart, John, over to you guys.
Thanks, Matthew, and thank you everyone so far. And welcome to everyone listening. I can see some familiar names on there, so good to see you. I guess what I'll start with is just pull up some slides just to talk about how we got to creating the strategy. I think with the time frame we have, we'll try and cover as much as we can, but we'll never be able to cover everything. There's so much that's gone into achieving this platinum standard, and a real collective approach, as Joe mentioned, including everyone on this call, and Matt a tiny bit as well. You definitely helped earlier last year. So I will attempt to share my screen. Please bear with. Just do this. Apologies if you see yourself for a second. I'm hoping that everyone can see this. Does that look okay, Matt? I will zoom in.
Yep, all good. Just zoom in a little bit and it looks perfectly fine. Yeah, that's perfect.
So just briefly about the event. This was the first World Athletics Championships to be held in Glasgow. There was a previous edition in 2019, the European Athletics Indoor Championships, which was comparable. There's some stats and some great graphics on there. And if we had more time, I'd really delve into some of our branding as well, because it does really align to our social impact program too. But that's a whole other session. We'll save that for another day. But importantly for me, and Joe and others have touched on in terms of the vision was set very early on when I started and analysing where I wanted this event to go. And really, it's looking back. Glasgow has an incredible track record of hosting major sporting events. It's well known around the world for it. And one of the catalysts that I recognise is Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. And it just so happened to be the World Athletics Indoor Championships was on the 10-year anniversary of those Commonwealth Games. So I really used that as a bit of a benchmark for us to look at what Glasgow 2014 did for the city and Scotland as on a wider level, and look at all the events that have come since then and how we can use this moment as a leapfrog moment. And really what I wanted to do was to take a look at where we are in 2024. 2014 was a very different landscape in terms of financials and politics and sustainability and all of those other things. And I wanted to use this event to look forward so that Glasgow and Scotland can use this as a new blueprint for future major championships coming to the city and the country. And the idea of that was to focus more on our social impact program, focus more on those communities that see these events come in and disappear and come in and disappear, and actually really engage with those people. So we set this vision. I'm not going to talk through the vision in any great detail, but that's just practically what I've explained to you of how we came about this vision. And the reason I'm talking about this is because it all this is the pathway to get to our social impact strategy and ultimately to how we came about setting out our ambitions for the Athletics for a Better World Standard. So, beautiful picture of Glasgow there. For those of you on the call that's been to Glasgow, it's a very green city and a very proud and passionate city. And this just takes me forward into Deer Green Place. So Glasgow in Scots Gaelic is actually Glasgow, which is translated as Green Hollow or Green Glen, but is more commonly known in the city as Deer Green Place. Now, what better narrative, better background do we have to set sustainability at the top of the agenda in this proud green city? Not least because it had recently held COP26 just a few years ago. And following on from COP26, Glasgow set some really ambitious net zero targets. So this is just a perfect example of how the city and the organising committee and the International Federation all align to trying to achieve the same thing, and it's about gluing that together. So this is one part of the background here. And then, as I touched on, 10 years on from Glasgow 2014, how do we recognise the successes of that, and how do we continue on? So I've spoken about the benchmark, but also from a legacy element. And we'll come back to the arena in a little bit, but the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games was a huge regeneration project for the East End of Glasgow. This is a lower SIMD area of the city, and it's also where the arena where most of the major sporting events take place. So again, you can sort of see the foundations that we're starting to build here to get to the strategy. One of the elements I've just thrown on an image there is that arena was built prior to the Commonwealth Games and therefore over 10 years old. And it's a hugely successful arena. The amount of use the athletics facility gets there, as well as the cycling facilities and other community elements of that arena. What we wanted to do as part of this narrative that we're talking about is how can we refresh this arena to be one fit for to hold the best world championships we could deliver, but also to extend that legacy for the people of Glasgow and certainly the people in that East End community. We want to show them that we can use these events as leverage to reinvest in the facility. So one of the things we did is a brand new track working with our World Athletics partners. And we're very grateful to Glasgow Life and Glasgow City Council who also bought into this vision and delivered this for us. In addition to that, and what you can't really see, and it might be less exciting, is there was a new lighting system that we put in to have more sustainable energy source. So the other side of the arena on the cycling side had that in ahead of the Cycling World Championships last year. So we put it in ahead of athletics. That's another great legacy for the venue. There was also a new building management system that might be less exciting for this call, but there was a number of other elements that were going on in the arena to reinvest and continue the great legacy that has. So I sort of touched on a couple of these, and then the reason I put this together is, you know, some people that I speak to at conferences or whatever, it's like, how do you get to that strategy moment? And I'm trying to build that in the narrative here of all of the things that we did that allowed us to come to strategize. And ultimately, this is the process step by step for an event like this is look at what was set out in the bid stage with your funding partners and the KPIs, analyze those. Sometimes those are set many years ahead of the event and years ahead of someone like me coming in to build the organizing committee. So you have to analyze those and understand if they're still practical and you're still able to do those things, but also with the element of, can we enhance any of those things? Are there more things that we can do that, you know, weren't in that stage? So we sort of go from that point and then to that geographical research, looking at those communities. What have they gained in the past 10 years, or what have they lost out on the past 10 years? What does that demographic look like today compared to what it did then? And all of this sort of takes you into analysing where your challenges are. I mean, the challenges with all events are time, resource and money. They're always the challenge. So you have to be able to prioritize which of those you're able to achieve in the time frame. And it won't surprise anyone on this call, but you can never do everything, and you can't beat yourself up for not doing everything, but set out really clear ambitions that are achievable and be very proud of those and make them meaningful. So that's what we did. And then something I'm really proud of is we created a social impact working group. And the point of this working group was to make sure it wasn't just myself, my team, or Bob, or it wasn't just us coming together deciding what this would be. It's actually bringing in a lot of externals and a lot of city representatives as well, because they have that knowledge and to have that combined approach from third sector, from sustainability organizations, from community outreach organizations to mental health charities, like having that full collective picture really created something beautiful, because everyone in that working group wanted to positively impact the people of Glasgow. So, but it's how we brought all of those together and aligned that. So how can this event help achieve some of those things? So that's what we did, and that group created our social impact strategy, and then it came down to integrating those plans across all of the functional areas of the event, and the evidence pieces, etc., and how we achieve the standard. I've probably whittled through that a little bit quickly, but at this point on this glorious picture, I'm going to bring John in, who'll talk a little bit about how do we go from that vision and strategy into implementation. And as I touched on, we absolutely don't have time to go through everything that we've done. So John will talk through some of the high-level pieces. Over to you, John.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, the guys have really kind of set the base there as to how we go from the strategy and the words into making that reality and actually being on the ground in the community. That little picture there we've got is not confetti. That is actually our food tokens that we used, which were recycled DVD cases. I don't think many people have time for DVDs now, so putting that to a good point was having little tokens like that as recyclables. And that was just one of the kind of small elements that we brought in, but they all build into what we were doing across that sustainability. And obviously, as Bob mentioned, they're trying to reach that the Athletics for a Better World standard. It's all about the little things all coming together to create the bigger picture as we go. Looking at how we made it reality, we probably start off at the top there. Stuart's mentioned a bit about our vision there, which came at the very beginning. I think that's, just to reiterate, that's a very important point to make, is that have this embedded from the very, very start. Have this as important as having an arena, as having individuals coming along to take part in any of your events. This is really important for driving this through from the start to the finish, as Joe also mentioned, having that whole life cycle taking part within your social impact strategy. Our first part of call would be our pillars, and you can see them at the top there: sustainability, equality, diversity and inclusion, and access to sport and physical activity. They're basically our three foundations for everything that we were doing through our social impact strategy. Some of them would cross into each other. So some of the stuff that we would do in sustainability, you would see that impacting within the EDI frameworks, and you'd also see that impacting within that access to sport and physical, and vice versa. They would all integrate across each other's. So what we would do with those three pillars, they were our guiding foundations that we would have for developing any of our programs. And that's what I'll go into next is the programs. We had a variety of programs, as Stuart's mentioned, probably far too many to mention in the time frame that we have this morning. But they were fundamental to what we're doing within the event. So I'll just run through a couple of them just now for you, just to give you a flavour of what we were doing in Glasgow underneath some of the key pillars there. So we had training for all our volunteers. We had over 550 volunteers at the event, and we offered them training in sustainability through one of our partners, Zero Waste Scotland. And that was for things like carbon capture, which is very prevalent in the news just now, but what does that actually mean to people? So for us, having the opportunity to upskill 550 people in what's a new concept to many in terms of carbon capture means that we can also leave a legacy for future events and for the city as a whole. That person who's the volunteer tells their friends, tells their partners, and it develops across the city. So it's not just those 550, but it's that branching that goes out from there. We also offered training in mental health, which was a first for Glasgow and a first for our athletics events as well, in terms of how we integrated with a local mental health charity called SAMH, Scottish Action for Mental Health, and we worked very closely with them to develop a mental health programme for our volunteers, which again has that outreach into the public as well. If that one of those programmes help somebody within our volunteer sector and it can help somebody without, then that's a success that we should be very, very proud of. We also had litter picks with our schools, our local schools in the area. Just giving them a little bit of an idea about sustainability and how it's important to look after your community and the environment that you live in. We had things such as menu planning, so making sure that any of the menus that we created were taking into account the food that we had available within the local area, and also making sure on food waste. And in that, we linked up with a local food charity, local food bank. So any excess food that we had, we could make sure that that would go and not be wasted, not go to landfill, not simply be thrown out. So again, that was a first that we had for the city, and that's something that we'll aim to continue as we go through with other events within Glasgow. We also had a look at, I mentioned there the meal tokens, we also had there about diverting waste, which is really important. So again, working with local companies and partners to make sure that that's what we're delivering, is making sure that as much waste as possible could be either recycled or generated into energy. That's just a kind of flavour of some. There's a lot more that we can go through in the questions in terms of what we're doing. There's a few more there you can see. So we had obviously our electric vehicle fleet, which was very important for us in terms of that sustainability that we're looking for through athletics for a better world standard. The picture there of Josh Kerr is not just a picture of Josh Kerr just to be Josh Kerr because he's Scottish. If you look in his hand there, he's got water in a box, and that was our main water supplier for the event. Again, looking at that recyclable element of everything that we are doing within our events. Our picture there on the left-hand side, the bottom left-hand, is our mass participation event for schools. So we had nearly 200 children coming along for our mass participation event, and they were schools within the local area around about the Emirates Arena where we have, and as Stuart mentioned, they're some of the poorest communities in Glasgow. So often they're the ones who don't see any of these events, don't feel part of these events. And it's very important to try and bring people from your communities into these events and make them feel as if they're valued and if these events are for them. And then that other picture there, that was one of our school litter picks. Again, in the local area, you can almost see the Emirates behind that picture there. These were all within the footfall of the event, and it's bringing the event to the local community, who again might feel as if they've been missing out in the past, and that's kind of really important to make sure that everybody feels valued within the city. That kind of takes me on to the next part, and it's about places and purpose. So when you're creating these programs or when you're creating these strategies, why are you doing it? What's the point in you doing it? And where are you doing it, more importantly? So it was something that we looked at very closely at the beginning, and we decided that the East End of Glasgow, where the Emirates Arena is located, would be an ideal place for us to drive forward with our social impact and our sustainability plans. So that's quite important in terms of why are we doing it there? Again, I've kind of mentioned that before. It's about bringing the local community who might feel as if the events have never been for them before and giving them that feel and that taste of the event. I think we've already mentioned as well, I think all the guys on the call so far have mentioned, and I think it's crucially important, is partnerships and the partnerships that you develop for your programmes and for your event as well. As Stuart's mentioned, we created a working group which had a diverse range of individuals, companies, groups, charities, local communities, all involved in shaping what we were doing within sustainability and shaping what we were doing within our social impact programme. And a lot of the stuff that we are proud to have brought forward is because of those partnerships. Without those partnerships, we couldn't do our mental health training. We wouldn't be able to do our sustainability training. And it's linking in early with these charities to make sure that you can get as much out of them as possible, and also you're giving back to them. So there's a lot of things that you can do with good partnerships, and I would stress that if you're looking at social impact and events, partnerships are the way forward at the very earliest stage. And then finally, just to come on to a point that Joe made earlier on as well, again, it's a crucial one, is embedding your social impact across all your functional areas. It's something for everybody. It's not just for myself or Stuart to go with, and always having it as a side to what's actually going on in your event. Make it part of your event, make it, everybody's involved, everybody's gearing towards it, and it makes things at the end a lot easier in terms of people feel bought into it across the functional areas, and then for your reporting, it comes back a lot easier as well. So the two kind of main components there at the end, I would just kind of stress that partnership working and that embedding it within all your functional areas within your event.
John, Stuart, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I was frantically writing down questions as you were going through that, because some really interesting things I'd like to unpack there. We've got some questions coming in from the audience already, and please, we've got about 20 minutes, so we'll get through a few questions. So if you've got more questions, please feel free to ask as many questions as you like. I want to come back to one of your kind of last points. And you're talking about, so those two projects, the upskilling for carbon capture technology and the mental health project, I think are fascinating examples of really, really impactful projects around a sports event. And you've talked a little bit about the practicalities of, getting partners in early, kind of engaging at that kind of early stage. But, take us a step further, a bit deeper. How do you kind of knit those kinds of projects together? Because I think what our audience wants is kind of really practical advice. So if they were sort of looking at doing those sorts of partnerships, what's the kind of step-by-step to getting something like that off the ground?
I think in terms of what you're looking at from the partnerships is reaching out and doing a little bit of research within your area in terms of who are the local charities or who are the local groups that you can work with. We were quite fortunate that Sam H had been involved in summer events from a Glasgow Life perspective in the past, so we were aware of them. They have quite a good name in terms of the area, in terms of the work that they've done in the past within mental health. And it's also looking at what are the current issues potentially within your areas, within your city, within your country that you feel. So one of the things in Scotland is there is a push on people's mental health. In the past, it's always been physical health and how people, feel physically. And now there's this kind of reach out to mental health. So it's looking at potentially the areas that are impactful within your city. But it would be a case for me of researching what is around in terms of your local charities, third sector organisations, community groups, and reaching out to them and having that conversation and seeing what fits for your event and for your city.
I'll just also come in on the Scottish Action for Mental Health piece, because it was extremely fundamental to the success of this project. And John's touched on some of the narrative around mental health in Scotland. I mean, one of the elements connected to that is that, as John touched on, the SAMH had been involved in some events, but actually last year was their centenary year of existing. It actually predates the National Health Service in the UK, which I just find extraordinary. And the fact that this charity was actually created by a female doctor 101 years ago now, in Paisley, just outside Glasgow. And it's even that narrative around, if you think at that time, a female doctor in terms of coming to the forefront and creating something extraordinary for the period. So they're an incredible charity, but also it's this synergy between, as John touched on, the locale element of Glasgow and Scotland and mental health, but how we also see that in sport, and how sport and elite sport can play a leading role in that sphere in terms of the athlete journey and pre-event, or the athlete journey post-competition, retirement, whatever that may be. There's a lot of synergy around that, and the impact you can have when you have role models speaking openly about some of those things. So our ambassador for the event was Scotland's most decorated athletics athlete, Ailey Doyle. And Ailey Doyle's been an incredible support to us throughout this event, but also has some really big moments in her career where mental health has impacted. And just my staff, my volunteers hearing about those sort of things has so much impact to those people. And as John touched on, that the whole program, we actually officially partnered with SAMH to develop this program that started about 8 months prior to the championships, delivering those training pieces for volunteers, but also for the staff, to enable them to really stay focused on the event, but understand their own mental well-being. So how some of the pressures and the intensity of the planning of the event, how that can impact them and how they can cope with it and how they can support each other, but also how that's going to be on the event. And then we had a well-being setup at the event as well. So any volunteers and staff could go and speak to SAMH representatives, and there's lots and lots to unpack with the SAMH piece, but it's a really important partnership that we had with them, and really significant. We're also the first ever event to sign up to Scotland's Mental Health Charter, which is just another incredible piece. And you know, things like that, elements of that will have helped towards the standard, but we didn't do it for the standard. We did it because it was the right thing to do. And I personally am incredibly proud of that, because it's, and John, part of John's role going forward is integrating some of these best initiatives in the wider Glasgow events portfolio. And it's just, there's just so much positive data we've had from that partnership that it'd be really difficult for an event to come here and not do something similar now.
I'm going to come back to John and Stuart, but you both in a second. But I'm going to broaden this out to the rest of our speakers now, because actually I want to get Susie. I'd like to get your view on this, because obviously John and Stuart have talked about it from a Glasgow perspective in terms of knitting those partnerships around sustainability and impact together. You know, what do you feel kind of future sports events can kind of learn from their example? And you know, what's your kind of take on kind of, you know, knitting these partnerships together to have wider impact, either environmentally or socially?
I think the partnerships are critical, because there's only so much you can do. You know, you're head down, you're putting on the sport itself, you've got the stadium, you know, you're trying to make, like, health and safety is critical, you've got to get the fans there, the ticketing, all of the operational stuff. You're so focused on all of that. That's great. And the point for me, definitely with sports and sustainability in this whole movement, we get that right, we embed it, like everything Joe talked about, you embed it, it's a part of everyone's functional area. How then do you use that platform? How then do we use sport as a platform to really inspire, drive change? Fundamentally, what we're trying to do is just make people think slightly differently. Come along, have an amazing experience, love the day, you know, go back inspired about all of the amazing achievements that they've seen, but also think, God, that was really cool. Now, whether it was something about the mental health, or it was like, you know, the packaging, or the food was, you know, there was more kind of vegetarian options that they may have, like whatever it is, they go home and they think, oh, I can do that. You know, we've driven change. To do that, you need to start, you know, your suppliers are part of your partners, your suppliers who are going to be able to provide the products and services. It starts there, finding the right people who want to get on board, have the same philosophies. And I think across the whole events industry, that is absolutely changing. Like over the last 5-10 years, we've seen a shift, and more suppliers able to support major events. So first off, your suppliers, and then you look at these types of partnerships with SAMH, and are there kind of community projects or programs that you can use the platform of the major event to raise their profile, to give them a leg up, to really reach more communities. That may be a more, you know, local kind of impact base, which is massively important. And, you know, fundamentally, we want certainly these major events to come in and absolutely drive local impact, not just parachute in and parachute out. And then the next bit is where you've got those commercial partners who've got a bigger reach, bigger funding, broadcast partners, to take some of the messaging, to align and create really meaningful activations, because fundamentally we've given them that authentic background. And that's where, you know, where we're trying to get to really lift off and you know, drive bigger scalable impact, make people think a bit differently, go home and say, actually, do you know what, I can do that.
Thanks, Susie. Joe, I've got kind of two-part questions for you. One of the parts has come from one of our attendees called Ahmed around KPIs. But the first one is on the functional areas. You talked about the importance of getting onto functional areas kind of involved, talked about workshops, communications. So I suppose the first part of the question is, you know, how did you kind of engage? How did you kind of communicate with those functional areas to get them involved? And the second part from Ahmed is, you know, how do you identify challenges related to measurement and getting accurate data for KPIs? But let's start with the functional areas part first.
Yeah, sure. So I think, when we joined the project, sort of, what was 7 months out, sort of September time, that the event was in March. I think one of the key advantages from our perspective was that Stuart had already, from that leadership perspective, had already laid the groundwork in terms of the importance of social impact to the functional areas. So we didn't have to come in and convince people that it was important. And that for us was, obviously Stuart had spent the time doing that previously, but that was a time saver from us in terms of like they got it, or if they didn't get it, they understood it was a priority. And therefore we could sort of dive straight in with the functional areas of trying to, I think, crucially meet them where they're at, rather than come in and say, we've got a standard and we need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's the operation, the people operating in those functional areas are experts in their own field, right? The energy guys know energy inside out more than I would. The transport guys know how to put on transport for event. Like they all know what they're doing in those areas, and it's about, for me, it was about meeting them where they were at, and then looking, having that collaborative conversation in terms of, that's great. Have we thought about this? So, we've got these bits in the standard that we are not quite hitting yet. What do you think we can do to sort of kind of solve that? Have you had that, going back to the partnerships conversation, can we get some of those questions in the procurement process? Can we challenge our suppliers a little bit more in these areas? So it was really sort of meeting them where they're at in terms of their knowledge and then tapping into that expertise, but also meeting them where they are in the sort of the life cycle. So when we first came in, it was still planning, there was still some procurements to be done. So we could try and leverage that and work with the functional areas to make sure, help them to know what questions to ask through procurement, for example, to their suppliers. And that was, that's including, I guess, your second point as well, both what they could deliver from an operational perspective, but what data that we would want from them come the end of the event. Because I think to that second point around the challenge of collecting data from it's a challenge. Like there's no two ways about it. People are busy. People, especially in events, they move on to the next event quite quickly. Even members of the LOC and delivery suppliers, like they're not around long after the event. They're off. So I think the precursor is almost setting that up. So as part of the operating plans, not just thinking about what we need to do like right here, right now, but this is also the type of data that you can give your suppliers a heads up on. You can think about how we're collecting this at this point, or your plan to collect this data so that it's a bit easier come the end. It'll still be a challenge because people are rushing around to wrap up the event, but at least it's not sprung on them at the end that, oh, all of a sudden we need to sort of scramble this data from the supplier or what have you. So I think that giving people as much heads up as the type of data that you would want to come back and the type of evidence that you're looking for is crucial. You might not get it straight away, but it won't be as much as a surprise to them. So yeah, they're a couple of bits I think that I would pick out and answer those couple of questions.
Stuart, question for you and John. You kind of alluded to it during your presentation, which all sports organisations have issues with: money, resources, and time. Everyone's got that challenge when you're hosting an event or looking after a sports organisation. But how do you keep sustainability and social impact top of mind when there are kind of difficult decisions to be made around time and budget? How do you stay true to that vision when there are some kind of conflicting priorities? Maybe Stuart, we'll start with you on that one.
That's a great question, Matt. Listen, it's tough. Major events are tough, and they really are. They're tough enough without focusing on social impact and sustainability. But I think in terms of the focus, it's making sure that the team are sort of comfortable enough in the operations, and where there are challenges in maybe operational delivery or big decisions that need to be made, is always having I always have a bit of a framework when we try and do something. Is this the most sustainable way of doing X, Y, and Z? And if not, why? And you analyze that why, whether it's you don't have time to do the sustainable option or research the sustainable option, or you don't have the budget to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always making sure that thought process is in the minds of everyone in the organizing committee. It's not just a case of oh, I can't be bothered doing the sustainable thing. I just need to get this thing done. It's having that thought process and making rational decisions. I mean, again, some of it comes down to leadership in that Joe's touched on that. I'm very hands-on in each element of each functional area. So it's not a case of standing off and saying you have to do it sustainably, go off and do it. It's really getting into that detail with them. And I think with my team, when they feel that support, it can allow them maybe to focus on the operations, and maybe I can help analyze some of the social impact elements of it. And you know, we touched on at the beginning of this, you can't do everything. And there are things that we did with the event that we had to park, you know, the sustainability ambitions for a number of reasons. So I think well, I don't stop talking about social impact and sustainability. I mean, even now, this is, you know, pretty much an everyday thing talking about this. And I didn't stop talking about it through the planning. And it becomes that element of where, because I'm constantly talking about it, the priority can never waver. It's, you know, every team meeting, every conversation that's had, you know, partners were really, really supportive and behind this. And that really helps because it's just more of a collective approach. And again, the reasons why we wanted to do that USP for Glasgow, we wanted to show World Athletics that Glasgow is the city to host major sporting events, not just because they can do them, but because they innovate and they push the boundaries and they set very high ambitions. So that's probably in a quick nutshell for me, Matt.
Anything to add, John? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
I think I'd learn. Stuart mentioned it there at the end about the partnerships, and I think I mentioned it when I was giving a little bit of an explanation. They're crucial, and if you can get that buy-in from all of your partners, that social impact, sustainability are crucial, as you know, people coming to your event, everything, it's intrinsic to the event. You do feel that it takes a little bit of the load off, whereas rather than you having to try and do everything, as Stuart kind of mentioned there, making sure that, and I think we've all mentioned it, and Joe mentioned it, making sure it's across all the functional areas and all those partnerships, and everybody's driving it forward. It's not just, you know, out here and it's a nice little thing to have. It's crucial. That might have been the case 15, 20 years ago, but sustainability now is absolutely crucial to any of the events that we're doing. As Bob mentioned at the beginning of the hour, this is what events are getting judged by now. This is really crucial to future events. It's crucial to, you know, the future of what we're doing within local communities and securing funding and making sure that we continue these fantastic events. So for me, it would be that partnerships is the crucial one to make sure that everybody is on board with where you're going within sustainability and social impact.
Thanks, John. I did have my last question for Bob, but he seems to have disappeared. I don't see if Bob is still around. So maybe, unless Bob can let us know he's around, maybe I can throw this one to you, Susie, because you'll probably have a good oversight of this as well. So question from Andrew is there an assessment criteria from World Athletics for how host cities will be graded on sustainability, probably with regards to the Athletics for a Better World Standard? And sort of how do you feel about having a platinum event? You know, how important is this for World Athletics going forward?
I'll see if he's still on the call, but he's I'll take it until he interrupts.
Take it until he interrupts, yeah.
Fundamentally, like in a lot of cases, the host city is actually becomes the LOC, isn't it? It's a core part of the LOC. It's one of the key partnerships for it. So absolutely, like how this is now part of the bidding criteria. So one of the things we started off with when we looked at this was like, how do we make this, you know, mandatory, fundamentally, how do we make sure that this becomes a core part and it's built into that process? So it is part of the bidding criteria. We almost probably did actually put that in before we'd refined the criteria. You're back, Bob. You can take it over if you want.
Bob's back. I don't know if you heard the question.
Sorry, I faded out here a bit. Please.
Yeah,
it's all right.
we're just
Susie,
talking about we're just talking about the host city and the host city's involvement and how we embedded it into the bidding criteria at the first step. So the bids that come back are now evaluated, and the core part of that is the sustainability credentials. So what the city can offer to World Athletics in terms of, delivery around these issues is, and around the Athletics for a Better World Standard is core. So it's really embedded in the whole process.
And just to add to that, that has evolved. Now, as I mentioned earlier, from 2027, all of our World Championship events, it will become a contractual obligation to deliver to a gold level against the standard. And part of that obligation is to, obviously in advance, to provide a plan on how that's going to be achieved. So we will be working closely with LOCs to help them get to that point. And again, this is why it was really fantastic to see this example from Glasgow in how that was achieved. And as Susie mentioned earlier, it really is all about planning. We have two kind of sort of two ways to look at the standard. One is by through our World Championship events, and a large part of that is really planning in advance, and then really looking, really emphasizing the legacy piece to that, so we aren't just an event like Susie said, who just parachutes in and out. And then at the same time, for our annual, for the smaller events that take place year to year, it's really about setting setting that baseline and improving year on year, and then getting more elements of the community involved in your event. And again, there were some great examples from Glasgow in how to do that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bob. So we've just gone over the hour, so I think it's time to wrap this up there. But thank you so much for everyone who joined our webinar today and staying so engaged. We got some really good number of people on this, so really interesting topic and lots of really good questions. A big thank you to Joe, Susie, Stuart, John, and Bob for taking part in this webinar. This webinar has been recorded and it will be up on the Games website and on YouTube in the coming days. So you feel free to watch this back if you have the chance and you want to engage more from it, or you want to share it with colleagues and friends. And our last and sixth webinar will be happening in a couple of weeks. I think it's Tuesday, the 13th of June, I believe. We'll be looking at some of our key takeaways from the Games project so far. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye.